Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to do a little bit of an in-depth video today for the more hardcore audiophiles, the ones that understand the importance of your room setup, room treatments, and how much that can elevate the performance of your gear. If you already have great gear, or even if you have budget gear, how you can get near state-of-the-art performance by just improving your room and the setup of that gear. And so a lot of my videos have touched on that topic, but I wanted to do an all-encompassing video. Now, that's a misnomer because you can't do an all-encompassing video on YouTube I'm trying to do this in 20-30 minutes. But the best I can to integrate all these topics that I've kind of touched on in the past, both with setup and room treatments, because that's sometimes what you don't see in videos and tutorials. They either focus just on the setup of your speakers and some maybe primitive measurements and stuff, golden ratios, all this kind of stuff, and then they ignore the room treatments, or you talk about room treatments or how to make room treatments, but really not how to apply them, how to address different frequency issues. It's just haphazard kind of advice. So kind of things that I've learned over the years I wanted to put into a video. Now, for those that don't want to do it themselves and you have the budget to, hire somebody to do that, it's a service I would consider doing, probably in conjunction with the guys at 3MA, because they have some of the room treatments, but there's other room treatments that I use as well, from ASE Tube Traps, Real Traps. There's a bunch of companies, GIC, Acoustics. So, yeah, if you're the type that just wants to outsource it, send me an email. We could talk about that. But really what I'd like to do is share with you how you can do it on your own, because what I've found over the years is that it is kind of rewarding if you can do it yourself and take the time to learn it. I know a lot of people don't have time. They don't just want to get to the end game real fast. But if you're the hardcore audiophile, this is more your style video. Oh, and also, before I go too far, this is another one of my shirts that I made. I don't know if you like this one. And also, let me show you something. This is cool. I didn't make this, but it's a bracelet that's made from the inner label of an LP. So this is Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, and the guy made bracelets out of different album, and so it's pretty cool. Anyway, shows you're a hardcore audiophile. Yes, I got a snake ring too. Crazy glasses. You'll see me at Expona. It'll be easy to find me. I'll be wearing something crazy for sure. In any case, let's get down to business. And one of the things, even before talking about the integration of setup and room treatments, is a thing that people overlook, is picking the right speaker for your taste. If you don't get the right speaker for your taste and what application you're going to do for your room, you may not ever be happy, no matter what of these tips I use. And a perfect example is the video I just did with the horns from Oswald Mills OMA and the Wilson Audio. Obviously, those horns require much more finicky setup, a size room, and it would need a subwoofer. So you got a budget for where you're going to put that, or you can have a big enough room for those drivers to integrate properly. Certain speakers will have more demands on your setup than others, and certain speakers will be more to your taste than others. Like for me, I just don't like that horn honkiness and the shouty nature. Even point source box speakers, as I've mentioned in the past, tend to shout the music. The drivers are pistonic, and they kind of ruin the impression that I'm listening to anything but speakers when I feel like it's just drivers shouting the music. And just to give you a little synopsis, if you haven't seen previous videos, of how I've evolved into my taste. Now, this doesn't have to be yours, but you want to at least have experience with different type speakers so that you pick the one that you know is your style and that you like. If you don't know all these other styles, it is worth going to these shows or going to a dealership that can expose you to these different style speakers, because they are vastly different. Even if they measure the same, they will give a different presentation and react to your room and what your preferences are a lot different. So starting with box speakers, traditional point source box speakers, I did that. Then I went the BBC route, which kind of has their own little curve not perfectly flat, very strong though into the integration. The box is designed to resonate with the music so you don't have any annoying resonances, and it's a pretty good budget option as well. Many people are happy end game right there. But then I tried open baffle, tried the Maggies. I have the Wisdoms, which aren't really the open baffle, but line arrays and those such, and then subwoofers or big sub boxes that go with the speakers to give full range. And so over time, what I realized, some deal breakers to me were, it need a speaker, and without going into flowery language like a lot of people go into, hardcore defined terms for me is a speaker has to be full range. If you do not have full range ability of your speaker, it will never sound realistic. I mean, your voice won't even sound realistic. In real life, you hear all the frequencies, and you may not have your voice, the majority of it may not be at like 20 hertz or 30 hertz, but there's just certain elements that kill the realism if it's not there. And like when I played those Oswald Mills audio horns, it definitely needed a sub, and I could just tell the tonality on top of the honkiness was wrong because I was missing so much of that harmonic layering and structure of every instrument. Even a cymbal hit has just a brief moment of a thud when that stick hits it. And so there's so many little nuanced realisms that get missed if you don't have a full range, detailed, neutral speaker. You want to start with that. Now, you may not end up with DSP and whatnot. Your preferences may be more like the Harman curve, and that's why having DSP is very important, because no speaker, even if it's super flat in the anechoic chamber, you're not going to put it in an anechoic chamber. You may not even like it flat. You have to be able to adjust on the fly to what you do at your room. And when you start with your room and the speaker that you like and have settled on that, full range, neutral, dynamic, can handle the volume you want to play at. These are all the keys. Play music you like. Don't worry about Fink or Keith Don't Go. If you don't listen to that regularly or don't want to listen to that every day as the only things that'll sound good in your system, play what you want on those speakers and make sure you pick the speaker first that you enjoy the best. And then if you enjoy it in an environment like a show or at a dealership, it can only get better at your home if you can dedicate the time that I'm about to show you to different things. So the first thing that I do when I'm setting up now, and what I've learned over the years, is listen at my listening position. And a lot of this is not going to take measurements. We're going to use test tones, and you can supplement it with measurements, and that helps. But I'm going to kind of focus on the non-measurement route for now. And so what you would do is sit at your listening position, listen to your speakers, play some music, and just feel like, what areas are you missing at your listening position? Because sometimes you may, almost every listening position and listening room is going to have a dip somewhere under 200 hertz, usually under 100 hertz, 60, 70, 40, around there hertz, where there's a null, and then there's usually a resulting peak. And you want to kind of get a feel for what music is exposing that and how bad it sounds to you. Some people can tolerate it. It may be a narrow peak or narrow dip that only a few songs hit with any regularity that it bothers them. You want to get a feel for your music tracks. And I've got a music playlist of over 200 tracks. You want to go through all of them, because sometimes it will only be at like song 120 where I hear a problem that none of the other songs uncovered. You need to hear different vocals, different instruments, different types of mastering, different just types of music can expose things. EDM to rap to acoustic to orchestras, everything in between can really tax your system. And it's so much more enjoyable when you can put anything on your system and enjoy it. That was really a big watershed moment for me, where I stopped listening to audiophile stuff and now I can listen to anything. And you can still tell the difference in quality of recordings, but you're never afraid anymore and only can listen to certain recordings, because that's where people go wrong. They start blaming the recording for everything, when really it's their system that can only handle these easy recordings that are really designed to sound good on everything. They have rolling bass that kind of mitigates a lot of problems, and it isn't got digital clipping. It doesn't have any compression. You're just going to be restricted to the same songs over and over if you don't audition and play what you really like. So once you get to that and you feel like, okay, I'm good with, it's really not wowing me when I play rap music, there's some irritations there, or when I play female vocals, there's some sibilance. Get a feel for where those issues are, because the next part you're going to do is play test tones. And I've shown it in the past in the video. Maybe I'll link that video where you can play focal tools is the one I use, but 20 hertz, 30 hertz, and listen at your listening position just with your own ears. You don't need an SPL meter or a microphone. Listen at your listening position, not microphone anywhere else. Your ears, how do they sound as you play them? If you had to judge, don't worry about what the SPL meter says. It probably will say different than what your ears say. What does each frequency to your taste and your ears sound even? And if it doesn't sound even, if all of a sudden when 60 hertz comes, it peaks up, and then 100 hertz, you can't hardly hear it, these are the best measurement tools you got for what's going to happen with music, okay? These are exactly where they're going to be. A mic might be here, and it still could be different, 6 inches different, and it can't capture 2 ears, the head shadow effect. So again, this is using your ears. Again, mics can work and measurements can work for certain things too and supplement this, but I'm kind of ignoring that for now. Go ahead and listen to each tone on your own. Take your time. You don't have to be one of these quick sweeps that go whoop. You know, that's what a measurement mic can do that. You can't do it. Take each tone singularly and then see which one's peaking out. And then you can take out a Radio Shack SPL meter or one on your phone and tell, okay, and see what the difference is per tone to see if you're hearing what the SPL meter is saying. When push comes to shove, if they disagree, go with your ears. That's what's going to matter when music plays. But that will also kind of give you a gauge of how close your ears are matching to what measurement tools are saying. And then if there is a lot of matching, then you know that you can use the measurement mic and tools for other things as well. If your ears aren't matching what the measurement tools are saying, then you've got preferences. You may have a hearing loss. You may have just different way of hearing that, and your ears are just positioned such that that's what you should only use, not measurement mics. So again, that's one key, when to use measurements or not, and how to test for yourself. Then once you've got the different frequencies identified that are either peaks or valleys, that's when you're going to want to think about DSP and room treatments. And again, DSP is extremely good at narrow frequency ranges where you have to do minor changes, mostly take down something, reduce peaks. That's really all I ever use it for. And even with Dirac may do measurements where it sees all of this. I set the curve, and again, I've done this with the mini DSP SHD tutorial. Watch that video. I manually set the curve every time with Dirac. I don't let it do any addition. I just find whatever my measurements are, the lowest point, I set everything on my curve at that lowest point, so it's never adding anything, and it's only going to take everything down and even everything up. If you have major issues in your room where things go really far down, well, you're not going to have that ability, because when you take everything down that low, then your volume can never go up. You've used all the correction in DSP and Dirac for just to bring the levels down, and you may not ever be able to turn your volume up high enough. So if you do have severe dips and severe issues, peaks or something, that's when you're going to want to go ahead and start looking at room treatments. And the other reason you're going to want to start looking at room treatments is not just for frequency response. Really what room treatments help with the most, well, I won't say the most, but in a lot of cases, it's echo. When you clap your hands, you want to not hear a long echo in your room. You know, you want to hit it loud, and you want to make sure that it's not a super long echo and voices aren't super long, because when you have a full music playing and you're playing at 80 dB or higher, man, that echo can really smear the music, and you're never going to get kind of that window on the performance of what was recorded. You're going to get a lot of, it may sound cool still because it may give you the impression you're in a auditorium or bigger room. So you don't want it totally dead. You don't want an anechoic chamber per se, but I find a happy medium between just quickly dissipating clap better in the long run. If you have a lot of echo, that auditorium effect can be cool for a little bit and on certain music, but over the long haul, it smears things and could be problematic. But listen for yourself. You know, this can all be adjusted for yourself. So room treatments are going to help with those major peaks, major dips, and the room echo. It'll definitely make the room sound more absorptive, and also diffraction can help a lot of that as well. So how do you do the room treatments and also the setup of the speakers? Well, number one, you got to think of things in two different partitions. Bass frequencies, pretty much everything under 200 hertz, partition that in your mind, and then everything over 200 hertz. So everything you've done to date, then start partitioning it. What am I going to tackle first, the bass or the upper? And it really doesn't matter what you tackle first. I would say tackling the bass first may be the way to go, because that's going to be usually the ones with the biggest peaks. Usually when you get to the higher ones, it's much more nominal in terms of the delta between the two, and DSP can correct a lot of that, or even very cheap, thin room treatments will absorb some of those high frequencies. If you look at a lot of these room treatments will have what frequencies it addresses and how much. A lot of them start at like 1K and up, which is very problematic in an area that people find annoying, and sometimes they like that toned down. So you can get away with cheap room treatments just for those frequencies. The bass is what requires big traps, lots of them. You can't just get away with filling a little box with a little bit of insulation, polyfill, whatever it is, and be done with it. And I've seen companies at these shows that will sell a box this big, and they say they will, oh, just one of these will fix the entire room. Just physics don't allow that. I mean, it's, you know, I've done the A/B test. You know, I've seen people pretend like they heard a difference, but trust me, it doesn't. It doesn't make a difference. And it won't make a measurable difference either. You can test that with your ears, and if you think you may be hearing stuff or biased or placebo effect, then take out the measurement tool to see for yourself. You're going to need a lot of room treatments for your bass area. And how much are you going to need? Well, you got to just keep trying, keep adding, keep placing things differently. But it also comes down to another aspect of the setup. This is where we're melding the setup with the room treatments. Your floor standards, depending on if you have satellites and then a sub, or floor standards and a sub, or you're going just full range floor standards, is going to be a part of the challenge you have to navigate. Full range floor standards are going to be dictated where you place them by normally everything above the bass frequencies, because it needs to image right, and then just the room dynamics. You just can't push them in the corners because you need extra bass, and you just can't move some of these big speakers anywhere. You are limited to probably a small square footage where realistically you can put these. So you want to get the placement about where realistically, wife acceptance factor, whatever purpose, where you can get those, and start doing some listening for just those bass frequencies of what areas are the problem. If you just have floor standing full range towers. If you have subwoofers, that's when you can do a lot of other little techniques. You can set your listening position, move the speaker, the actual subwoofer around to corners usually you would start at, but even then sometimes it's too boomy. You may want to pull them out, or center of the wall. And then again, I mentioned in a previous one, alignment with your other speakers gets that timing right. If you're not going to have DSP be able to fix it, you got to pretty much get that fairly close to your front speakers to not have that issue come up. So you're going to want to start thinking in the bass area, timing of the bass, roll off to those bass frequencies? Is it super low where those timing issues and the wavelengths aren't that big a deal? Or are you having to roll it off at 80 hertz or higher with a slow slope and it goes much higher in frequency your bass is playing, such that now timing is a bigger issue? All of these things I've mentioned in previous videos kind of have to start coming together when you're looking at your subwoofer and sub bass room treatment and setup. Now, going to my room, I'm going to show you, let me see the best way to do this. I can probably do it holding the camera. Let me just take it off here. I'm going to flip it around and I'm going to show you how many bass traps I have here. So let me flip this around. Okay, so for this room was a super challenge because, let me back up here. This room is small, and so I needed to make it sound big because it's got low ceilings. I like big speakers. You know, one of the other things on top of being full range and neutral is I don't like a sound stage that's 2/3 of the room down or half with a lot of these speakers. So these tall speakers, especially line sources and stuff, tend to fill the room more realistically all the way to the ceiling with music, and it doesn't give you the impression you're listening to speakers shouting at you, especially when you combine it with open baffle. So what do I have for bass traps, just strictly on bass? You see a lot of room treatments here, but bass traps in terms of ASC tube traps, big ones. And these actually rotate and do different things depending on how you rotate them. So ASC is one of my favorites. These things on the wall are actually huge treatments. Again, small boxes can do a little bit, and at least 4 inches thick to have any impact potentially on bass, or in most cases anything. Those is what I would recommend. Boxes that are at least 4 inches thick and filled with the right type of insulation, not just anything. There's certain types of rock wool insulation that works a lot better. And splash plates are good for looks. I'm not a big fan overall, although these with more seams I think are better than these. But I prefer these, which are just totally absorbed. These tend to be better for certain purposes. Now in your room, it may not be the same place that you put these. This is just what's worked for me in this room, but I'm just kind of showing you all the different types of treatment. These are the cheapest stuff that's dinky, a waste of money for the most part. Avoid that stuff unless, you know, again, that's stuff that may help just a little bit over 1000 hertz. But that stuff you want to avoid as much as possible. Even these little corner ones, I've had those for decades. But they, again, small things can't do too much. Diffraction, this is not going to affect the bass so much, but these things can be very powerful. So be careful with these. In fact, I kind of cover it with no-res behind me to kind of mitigate how much that thing has an impact. And if you only have one, you got to be careful, because if you put it on one side of the room versus the other, it could throw off your balance significantly. So usually I would get 2 of these and kind of mirror them on both sides of the room, because they are very powerful once you get a chance to try those. Again, these visual things look like paintings, but they're actually thick room treatments, and fairly thick, not quite 4 inches, but and also another thing you're going to have to learn to do, if you can see in the grooves there, a lot of blue tack, because anything you hang on the wall, it's another reason why I like these ASC tube traps, and I like to put them on like speaker stands. Anything on the wall that you hang on a wall, paintings or anything. Hey Amy, how you doing? These things will resonate. You have a subwoofer, you're playing loud, you're playing certain music, at certain points it vibrates the drywall, it's going to vibrate things on the drywall, it'll vibrate certain things on your shelf. So you're going to want to invest in blue tack to kind of mitigate and absorb certain annoying resonances. Same thing with your air ducts here. I've got some in there to kind of prevent that from rattling. Plastic ones are very good, but I don't want to get too far off topic. Talking again with bass traps, What's behind me here is a huge box, about 3 feet tall. It's one of these boxes you can get at Home Depot to put clothing for moving. It's got a rack that actually you can hang clothes on. So that's meant for moving, but I just filled that entire box behind me with insulation. So that's a huge bass trap right behind my listening position. So 1, 2, 3 here in the corner. On the ceiling are 2 oval, bass traps, bass traps, as well as absorptive, for all frequencies. That's the one good thing about a bass trap, is that it kind of impacts everything. And then I've got another one here, another triangular one here, another one there. This is a flight case here, totally filled with insulation. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bass traps in this small room to even out the bass. And I've shown my measurements in other rooms, and I still had a little bit of issues at 60 hertz, 60 to 70 hertz that I had to address. So let me sit back down. Maybe if I back up, you could see Amy. She's better to look at than me. Anyway, so just a little quick walk around how much I invested in just bass traps to help out things. And with 2 subs in this small area and the additional benefits it has, it evened out things a lot, such that I don't have those huge problems that I'm making Dirac or DSP address. And I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference, and especially when I play home theater, when I have all 5.2 channels playing. It's mind-boggling how much it's better than almost any dealership you go into. And I'll give you a little aside what got me into this originally, and something that the reason I tell you this story is because the thing that I think it may work for you too. If you go to these shows, we get neurotic about things just reading stuff on the internet. And, somebody says, oh, I need a USB reclocker. I need this linear power supply. You can get neurotic by what you read so easily on these forums, but just anecdotal stories from people you don't even know. But when you go to these shows and you hear with your own ears something that you've never heard before, like the Blue Hawaii and the stacks from, in my case, that's when you start getting neurotic and want to buy or achieve that same level of performance. That's when the rubber hits the road. And so several years ago, probably, now more than 5 or 6 years ago, I heard $100,000 home theater setup at one of these shows. And it was amazing. It was one of the best things I've ever heard at any show. And it was actually Roger Waters' The Wall, which is actually one of the best DVDs you can order. And I became obsessed with getting the performance that I heard at that $100,000 setup with that DVD. I wanted to recreate that in my home, no matter what it took. Budget and all that aside, and the room I was given, I knew there were certain things, but I said, I could probably even do better than they did, because they were just in an open area lobby of a hotel and had restrictions, although they had like 16 subs and 20 overhead speakers. But I put in time. I put over a year, watched that DVD over and over and over and over. I mean, just every night, tweaking settings, moving room treatments, dedicating my life of audiophile to just getting what I heard at that show. And that brought me a huge way in my journey. That effort paid off. And you know how it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything? That's when I knew I crossed that 10,000 hours, because then when I was able to achieve, and even without ceiling speakers, and hearing the planes going over me and getting that feeling, that visceral feeling that I got at that show, and in some cases even better, and then I go to some dealerships and play that same DVD and it's nowhere near as good, is when I really realized that going through all that effort pays off, and nothing can replace the enjoyment I get now when I play that The Wall by Roger Waters on DVD. And anybody that comes over here and hears that, they usually want me to set up their home theater after that. So it's really a case of anything you do for your home theater translates, because it's just sound, okay? And it's actually much more difficult for your home theater when you're judging 5 channels and roll off for all these channels. So I understand through my own sweat and how important it is to control the room and the bass, and how much that pays off, and how much all of these room treatments make a difference. Now, I'm sure you're sitting there saying, number one, how much is that going to cost me? And number two, I don't have a dedicated room. How could I possibly do all of this? Well, we all have trade-offs in life. We'd all like to have, a Ferrari, Lamborghini, but we'll drive a Lexus or a Mercedes or a Honda, and be totally happy and not missing that much. So it's a case of, though, getting the maximum performance out of what you have. But do what you can to get it as close as possible. And now with the technology of DSP, mini DSP, controlling the crossovers and whatnot, these things can really get you much closer than having to buy a ton of room treatment. So I was doing it before I did a lot of EQ. I could probably get away with not as many now, but the two together are required. You can't get one with it. You can't use solely room treatments and fix very minor deviations that do make a difference, but you also can't do all DSP to fix every room. The two have to go hand in hand. And another thing that's very primitive that I see with people with subwoofer setups, and this is a real key thing to note, is when you set your roll off to your subs. Let's say you have a speaker that goes down to 40 hertz, and then you've got a sub, and you say, oh, I'll roll it off around 40 hertz to my sub, because that's what the frequency response plus or minus 3 dB of my main speakers is. Okay, that's a primitive way to do it. You can get away with it. It may work, but again, it's all about listening at your listening position, like I talked about, and listening to test tones and everything about, because plus or minus 3 dB at 40 hertz is not saying that your main speakers just stop playing at 40 hertz. It may just be 4 dB down at 35 hertz or at 30 hertz. And at 25 hertz, maybe it's 5 or 6 dB down. It's not like it falls off a cliff. Some speakers may fall off a cliff. You have to kind of, judge, does it really stop at 40 hertz and precipitous drop off, or is it just a modest roll off? If so, crossing it over at 40 hertz, you're just wasting money on a sub and just getting a little bit of boost for that little extra frequency extension at the bottom. And, it's kind of rough to justify a big sub that's high quality just for that. Especially when you listen to those tones, it's very important to the part of the music, but it's not something that you want to spend a fortune. What you really want a subwoofer to do is two things. You want it to take a load off of your main speakers. It will be so much more dynamic. Your amps will play so much better. Everything will improve when you remove from that crossover and your amplification and your drivers the necessity to play everything 20 hertz and below. Again, most crossovers don't have anything like a rumble filter to roll off the low frequency stuff. So your drivers are going to try to produce it if you don't roll it off. And that takes a lot of power. If anybody's doesn't use a rumble filter and has seen drivers moving like crazy on a turntable, it's requiring all this power and you can't even hear it. It's infrasonic frequencies that you can't even hear. But guess what? All that excursion on the driver, all that demands on your amp is still there. And so you want to be able to cross all over and alleviate your speakers from having to produce those low bass frequencies. That's number one. And number two part of the subwoofer, why you want it, is because not to really cross it over at where your speaker is necessarily start falling off. You want to look at where your room has that dip that I talked about. Every room will. So if your room, though, has a dip like mine had a little bit at the 60, 70 hertz range, that's where you want to cross it over. Because remember what I said, you never want to boost anything with DSP, and then your room treatments are likely not going to boost stuff. They may even out the modes and stuff. So what the crossover does for you at 60 hertz, now you've got sub coming from a different area of the room than your main speakers. So that alone may even out that dip. But then as well, when they both are playing around that same frequency, it actually creates a peak because they're combined at the same frequency where you have that dip. And so you get the natural boost without adding DSP, adding gain that requires more power from your amplifier and whatnot. You're getting bass from two separate areas at the frequency where you have the dip. We did this at my friend Doug's house. In fact, if you watch the videos where we set up his Rel 25, we did it the old-fashioned way. It just, and then we did it at the frequency point where he was having that dip. And sure enough, got rid of it without boosting anything. And then the DS speaker was mainly just there to take off the peaks that remained in his room. So I'm getting a little bit long in this video. This is going to end up having to be a multi-part video. But I wanted to give you this preface of how much more in depth room setup, subwoofer setup, speaker selection, room, all the stuff that goes into it is a lot of work. It's not something you can just buy one or two of these boxes, throw them all up, randomly up. You need to spend time. And trust me, I spent tons of time doing this, and there's just no shortcut to it. So it's a fun journey if you want to do it. If you want to outsource it, hit me up on email. Maybe we can consider something. Probably what I would do if anybody ever wants to outsource it, part of the whole deal, if you want to do this, you're going to come here first. And you're going to hear, and we're going to turn on and off stuff, and you're going to hear how much setup and things matter, such that you're sold on it before you even go back to your house. And then we could take a chance of going to your place and then figuring out what needs to be done. But yeah, there is just no question that the single biggest factor that people overlook as an audiophile is their room treatment setup and DSP. By far, so many houses I go to have none of that, and they're not getting the ceiling of the performance of their gear. So hopefully you enjoyed this part one. It's pretty long in the tooth, so but there's going to be more. There's just really no way to shortcut it any more than I did. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, sign up, subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.